Hi, I'm David Haynes. I'm the opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And the editorial board and reporters and editors at the Journal Sentinel are joined today by three members of the Wisconsin Assembly, the Speaker-elect Robin Vos and Representative Suder and Representative Nygren. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being with us. We want to get to your agenda for the upcoming session, but I wonder if I could start with a question about redistricting. Representative Vos, you wrote an op-ed that we published recently where you talked about the idea that some Democrats have put out there that redistricting had something to do with the Republicans gaining their majority or adding to their majority in the last session. I'm not sure I would buy that either, but I do wonder if there isn't something to the idea of having a less partisan way to do redistricting the next time around. And I wondered if you would support or at least allow for discussion, an idea based, let's say, in an Iowa model or on a commission approach.
Well, every idea should be brought up for discussion. So first of all, I would say that I'm open to any idea that people would bring forward. I will tell you, I'm not incredibly supportive of the concept, and let me tell you some of my opinions, and then the gentleman can chime in.
I would love to.
Iowa, which has a model where the Legislative Fiscal Bureau or Reference Bureau, whatever they call it, drafts the plan. It then goes to legislature for adoption. This last time around, they actually rejected the first model. So even having a commission structure does not automatically mean that it's going to go right into law. They still had to go back, make adjustments, take political considerations into mind. So that's the process that we go through. We went through a very difficult process. We have done it now numerous times using new technology. Only once in the past 50 years has the legislature been united with one party in control. The Wisconsin Constitution actually says that the legislature shall be the ones who are in charge of doing redistricting. We could defer it to somebody else. But as somebody who really believes that elected officials should be making more decisions, not fewer, we are going to do a lot of things in our agenda to try to encourage elected officials to step up and make decisions where before we would push them off to the bureaucracy or say some unelected faceless bureaucrat would make the decision for us. So I guess I would be very skeptical of going to that model when in reality I want to go the other direction, which is to have elected officials make decisions, stand up for what they believe in, and then ultimately the voters will decide.
So, but there is some evidence that Republicans at least gained some advantage during the last session. Last go around at redistricting. If you look at the Senate districts in your own area, in Racine and Kenosha counties, a district that once was essentially a 50-50 district is now a pretty solidly Republican district. Why not remove that that idea from the process and let a less partisan go with a less partisan approach? Are you saying that didn't happen?
Well, I would say in my own area is a good example. If you take the way that the districts were drawn previously, you had Kenosha, the city, and the county, with a portion of Racine County, Racine, the city, and then most of Racine County in two different districts. I would make the case, having my hometown be Burlington, and I live in Rochester, that the city of Kenosha and the city of Racine have a whole lot more in common, because one of our main goals is always communities of interest. They both have a bus system. They both have a much more diverse population. They both have the opportunity for a school district that has different needs than one in the western end of the county. So I think in many ways you could make a case that as far as communities of interest, which has always been one of our very predominant areas, that you would have one that had more similarities and one that was more urban that had similarities.
Do you think in the past that those urban areas outvoted the western area?
Many times, but not always.
Okay.
You really had three different parts. You had more traditional farming, small communities. Then you had the suburbs of a larger city. And then you had the larger city itself. Kenosha was very similar. So in most ways, those two cities are the most similar. The suburbs and those areas west of the interstate also are similar. Also, another factor that really wasn't taken into account is if you look at increasing minority participation. There is a higher percentage of minorities in that district in the Racine-Kenosha area, giving a greater preponderance to elect somebody who would be a minority than you had before, where you basically had a dominant white population in each of those two counties. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into that decision that might not necessarily have been taken into account if it was just a bureaucrat sitting with a computer trying to make those choices.
What if that bureaucrat was trying to make districts more 50-50? You look at the gridlock in Washington, you look at how the polarization of the two parties, what if it was 50-50?
I've actually thought about that. There's a book, I can't remember the exact title, but I think it's called Bowling Alone, where it makes the case that the entire world is changing. People who live in cities have a greater tendency to think like each other. People who live in suburbs, it's the same, and people who live in small towns. So I think we're doing that to ourselves over the course of time demographically, and it shouldn't be the political system that tries to figure out how to split people up from communities of interest to make some sort of an artificial 50-50 district. It should be the criteria that we use. Maximize, or first of all, one person, one vote, so you have the greatest preponderance of equal representation that you can, maximizing minority participation, communities of interest, and lastly, trying to make sure that you have something that reflects what the legislature cares about. I mean, we didn't really take that into consideration. We had legislators paired together. We had a Republican who voted no because she was paired with a Democrat. So that's why at the end, people make their choices.
Just to be clear, you're open to any ideas, but it sounds like to me like you made a strong case to stick with what we have right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had said, are you open for discussion?
Right.
Of course I am.
Right.
That's one of the things that I think that the three of us, as we've had discussions of looking at the future, we want to try to do the very best job we can to foster debate. Doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with people on both sides. I'll take my own position and let my constituents make their own decision after I make my choice. But I think that a free-flowing, vigorous debate is what everybody in Wisconsin should expect, with that respectful end, where at the end you take a vote, this proposal passes or this one doesn't, but we should at least have the opportunity for discussion.
Well, I think it boils down to accountability as well. I mean, with an unelected bureaucrat or a commission, where is the accountability? With the legislature, no matter what the makeup, you at least have that accountability. I'll give you my assembly race as a perfect example. Redistricting, huge issue in my assembly race, and ended up prevailing. But it was a healthy discussion, and as long as both candidates were able to discuss why, particularly me, why I voted for the redistricting map, and I did in detail, time after time, many debates, that is important. It's important for the public. You will not get that, I would argue, with someone on a commission or someone who's appointed. I don't think you'd have that vigorous debate, and I think we need more vigorous debate, not less.
Well, and just one last point on that. Remembering how California went, right? In Arizona. So in each of those cases, they went to different systems. Arizona decided to have a commission, which had issues in and of itself throughout their process. The governor vetoed it, tried to get changes because they didn't think the map was fair. In California, they went to this winner-take-all system, thinking that that would somehow make elections more competitive. And what did they do? They, in essence, gave a supermajority to one party. So if your concept was to make more creative districts by having a different process, in reality, I think they made it worse. So a lot of times you just accept the reality that sometimes you're going to have partisan discussions, but if you have that respectful decision at the end, I think it's a better process than trying to figure out how to make everything supposedly fair.
Yeah, in California, Henry Waxman almost lost.
Yeah, that's true.
So, anyway, let's move on.
Let's move on to your agenda. You issued a press release this morning, I think it was, that the mining bill will be your top priority this next session.
Right.
Let's talk a little about that and why that is and what you hope to accomplish with that.
Well, we know that Wisconsin has a long history of trying to make sure that we are able to utilize all the resources that we have. Our greatest resource, of course, is the people that are here. They are hardworking with a great work ethic. We have a fantastic agricultural background where we do everything we can to try to maximize the opportunity for those in the agricultural community, farming, to become successful. Manufacturing, another area where we are still one of the leading manufacturing states in the country. An area that we have let slip by the wayside over the course of the past several decades has been mining. It's a long history in Wisconsin. On the flag, we have a miner. So that's been a long tradition where we have been able to take things out of the earth, ensure that it's done safely, and export those for use around the world and here in Wisconsin. For whatever reason, several years ago, a decision was made to, in effect, pass a mining moratorium. As we know, that was because of the Crandon mine and some concerns about environmental impacts. I think they probably went too far. And that's why what we're looking to do is to not repeal that mining moratorium, but to make some dramatic changes, at least for iron ore mining. We know that it can be done safely and efficiently. We know that in Michigan and Minnesota, their economies in many ways benefit from the extraction of that iron ore and the ability to have low-cost operations for manufacturing right in their home state. I know we can do it. We were very close last time. We had a good bill that passed through the Assembly. We had a bill that went to the Finance Committee where I'm sure you remember Alberta and I spent hours trying to negotiate with Senator Schultz to get to an answer with compromise. I think he asked for 9 different changes in order to vote for the bill. We gave him 7 of the 9 changes, which in anybody's math, 7 of 9 is pretty good proportions. But it wasn't enough for him to be able to vote for it.
Right.
So we went through the fall elections. We know that Senate races were decided on that. Senator King had her race primarily focused on that issue, and she was defeated. So now that we come back, Representative Suder really has been one of our leaders in drafting the bill, but they're using the finance version, which was negotiated as the basis to be able to move forward, and maybe you want to talk about some of that.
Sure, the finance version is the template, and as you know, many of those changes incorporated will be consistent. However, we do have to make changes to the bill. If you know, the wetlands bill was passed. That has to be incorporated into this bill. That was a monumental task in terms of drafting. We wanted to make sure we got that right. But we're also working with stakeholders and working with people like Senator Cullen. I know Senator Tiffany has worked, is sitting down with Senator Cullen and trying to figure out where we can find some common ground on some outstanding issues. But we're looking at every facet of the bill and doing what we feel is right to make sure that it's drafted correctly.
Right.
And we've spent months doing this. And also talking to people. So we're talking to both Democrats and Republicans as we go along.
When Tim Sullivan testified, he said that the bill, just a few last month, he said that the final bill that was presented last spring was not adequate, wasn't good enough. Are you incorporating the changes that he has recommended, that the Mining Association has recommended?
Well, I have called the Mining Association. They've not called me back yet, but we'll be happy to work with them and take a look at what they consider to be additional outstanding points for the bill. So happy to talk to anyone. Our offices are open. But again, you know, we want to do this right. We are going to have a transparent, open process. We're going to have a public hearing. But right now we're in the talking stages to see where people are at. But we also need to move forward. So we want to do this quickly, but we want to do it right.
And I think our hope is that once, Senator Cullen kind of issued basically a press release saying these were the points that he wanted to have in his bill because it hadn't yet been drafted. So my hope is that he'll get his bill drafted based on the work that was done over the course of the summer. We'll have the version that was drafted by the finance process and be able to have both of those at a public hearing. So we can let the public say what are the best parts of Senator Cullen's proposal, what are areas that we think we really support in the proposal that finance passed, and make at the end of the day the very best product for the entire state that protects the environment and actually brings mining jobs here.
Let me ask you this. The governor has said that creating jobs now is his top priority. This bill, the mining bill, will not create jobs for several years. Why is this your top priority?
Well, number one, we have to make investments into our future. We often hear, in this entire election, I think if you look back at the past, was about information that we wanted to have out there so we could talk about things for the future. I would argue that, yes, we have already made good investments over the course of the past 2 years to be able to have the fruits of our labor hopefully come sooner rather than later. We have WEDC, has some concerns, but the concept I think is one that really makes sense to be able to help businesses all across the state. Mining is one where we know it is going to be generational jobs. The iron ore body is being told that it'll be approximately 80 to 100 years worth of iron ore extraction. That's a long time to be able to get jobs for our state, and we're talking about several thousand, not just in construction, but also in the regular operations and the spin-off suppliers. So sometimes you have to make that upfront investment that doesn't immediately pay off, but it certainly does in the long run.
But there will be 3,000 jobs during the construction of the mine, and that's important. 700 on site. And there will be spin-offs from this as well, but during the construction there's those 3,000 jobs that are very important, particularly in northern Wisconsin. If you look at the salaries that those jobs will bring in, they're $80,000 plus salaries, and that's important. So,
but even construction won't start for 2 or 3 years.
That may very well be true, but the investment is also there for that company should they come in.
Right.
And that investment is also important to get things moving along. And if you look at the thousands of jobs that could be created, it's important to start that process so that we can get there.
If we had this talk 3 years ago and we said that we would know if starting January 1st that we'd have 3,000 jobs paying $80,000, we wouldn't have made that decision. Of course we would. So, Scott and I are both, in addition to that, Scott and I are both from northern Wisconsin. I grew up, some of my best memories as a child were spending time in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which has a very strong mining history, iron and copper. In different type of mines, those were the old traditional, dig a hole in the ground and pull it out. But in an era when there were no environmental standards, but this part of the country is still one of the most pristine. The water is clean, the air is beautiful, the landscape is still as it was 100 years ago. I guess my attitude as somebody from the north, if we could do it safely over 100 years ago, I do believe that we can find a way, and maybe we might need a tweak here and there on the bill, maybe we don't, But if we could do it safely 100 years ago and provide a opportunity for people to support their family in an area that doesn't have a lot of other jobs, folks, we should.
And it's a $2 billion economic impact. So it's an investment, and we're not simply authorizing the mine. That's not what we're doing, obviously. We are giving an opportunity for a company to come in, giving them some certainty, but they also have to follow existing DNR, air and environmental quality standards. They also have to deal and work with the Corps of Engineers and the EPA. So this is not simply authorizing a mine, but
Right.
that $2 billion, the chance to have that $2 billion investment statewide, I think is very, very important.
Well, and let's remember, if we had a large employer that said, we're going to come to Wisconsin and we're going to potentially bring several thousand jobs, we would, Republican, Democrat, no matter where you were, we would be falling all over ourselves to figure out one incentive package that they need in order to come to our state to bring those jobs. As far as I know, the mining company hasn't asked for a nickel. In fact, they're going to pay money up front to cover the costs of what it takes for the DNR to do all the research. They're going to apply for the permit, and then they're going to move forward without any economic investment on behalf of the state. We're in fact going to be the beneficiaries. I mean, this is one of those where, yes, it's not going to come right away, but we should be proud of the fact that they're going to choose Wisconsin.
And you're confident that whatever changes you make will not have a negative impact on the environment?
Oh, I'm very confident.
Just remember, the federal standards are still in place.
And we're working in coordination with the DNR as well, having conversations with their top mining regulator, if you will, and Ann and I have had conversations. We are working to address any concerns that happen to be out there, and those conversations have been very, very fruitful. So we're working in coordination with a lot of stakeholders, including the DNR.
I'd like to get a sense as to how much change you think there will be compared to what was passed by the Joint Finance Committee. Representative Suder, you said that you haven't even talked yet with the mining association.
I've placed phone calls,
You've
so
placed
I've done
phone-
outreach. Yes.
But there, I mean, here you guys want to hit the ground running. You want to move on this thing, and yet the group that actually has more experience than legislators, than really any other party in this whole thing is the mining association, and they haven't really they've been kind of on the sidelines. WMC has had more influence on this, and so I'd like to get a better sense as to how much of this bill that we have right now is going to be used, and how much buy-in are other groups going to be able to.
Boy, if you look, Lee, at the process that we have gone through going back to the beginning of the year, we have had public hearings. We have had ample opportunity for people to understand what's in the bill. We had a pretty exhaustive public hearing process, not just here, but the Finance Committee took more testimony. We went through an entire opportunity to change the bill. That was all done in public. So I guess my hope would be that I don't want to have a bunch of drafting done in secret. My hope is that we'll take what Senator Cullen did, bring it forward. We'll take what the finance version is, which we know was a public document that had lots of opportunity for input, and we'll put those before the mining committee. We have one in the Assembly, one in the Senate, and they'll take the best ideas from both and form a final product that hopefully we can get moving sometime this spring. But I don't want to have secret discussions with the Mining Association and say, what do you want in the bill? I mean, let them come and testify. Let them put it before the public and have an opportunity to have a full hearing.
And our doors are open, so I'm hoping that. I mean, my office is not that hard to find, so I hope they find it.
Representative
Yeah.
Vos, I know you have a lot of enthusiasm for the mining bill, but do you have what type of enthusiasm do you have for creating jobs like in the 30th Street corridor and places that were, the unemployment rate for in some of these places like 60% and you desperately need jobs?
Sure.
What kind of support do you have for that?
Well, as an example, we went today to Phoenix Lighting. Which is in the city of Milwaukee. They make equipment which goes directly into the mining operations because they produce the lights that go on all of the mining equipment that's sold all around the world. And there are companies like that all around the state that have a direct spin-off effect from the opportunity to have mining right here in our state. And I think that's what we need to focus on, because I agree with you, James. I mean, I don't want to have a situation where we only create jobs for northern Wisconsin. I mean, I represent Racine County, but I do know that we all have suppliers where there are direct economic benefits, be it in the central city, be it in the suburbs of Racine, or be it in, different parts of the state.
Joy Global did a presentation. Joy Global and Caterpillar did a presentation for us about a couple months ago, attended by both Republicans and Democrats. And at the presentation, they talked about the work that they do. First of all, they're hiring. I'm sure they're hiring for people in the same area you're talking about. But the impact that they have on the state as a whole. Of the 72 counties, I believe over 2/3 of them had industry that supported the work that they were doing. So while we're talking about northern Wisconsin jobs, this is a potential to have an impact throughout the whole state, not just Iron County. And I guess one of the pieces to this that I think needs to be discussed, and we'll get into it probably in our agenda, but is education and being able to provide the tools for students coming out of our school system, our public school system, that will allow them to go find good paying jobs, whether that's with a college education, technical school education, or just a high school education. I'm being from Marinette, we need welders, we need pipe fitters, we need electricians. Our schools aren't doing a good job providing those type of workers for us. So that's a bigger picture beyond mining. That's something that we need to be focusing on.
Well, and then John kind of led into it. That's one of the other things that we really want to focus on. So the 4 areas we're looking at are income tax reform, regulatory reform, making sure we pass a mining bill, and then really transforming education. So if we go back to education just for a second. I am lucky. I went and spent time this summer. We all ran for re-election. I have 60% brand new constituents, so I had a lot of new people to meet over the course of the summer. And I will never forget, in the village of Sturdivant, I stopped and knocked on a door, talked to a woman who described the fact that her child now gets to go to a different school. Racine Unified wasn't working out for their child. Just was not meeting the expectations of what those parents had. She never could have afforded to send a child to a private school, but now we have a school choice in Racine. And she talked to me, and I mean, she didn't cry, but she was really emotional about the impact that she thought of having a different school for her child, the impact it was going to have on the life of that one student. And I think that's where, when we look at education, some in the city of Milwaukee already have that choice, and that's wonderful. And I think it's not a panacea, and I have never thought that school choice was a single answer to solve every single problem. But I think we probably can agree, and this is another area where I hope Republicans and Democrats can unify around it, to say that the system that we have is not working for every single child in the state. For many it is. In my district, primarily, the public schools do a great job. They have high graduation rates. People are able to go on, even with a high school diploma, and get a decent job, go on to get technical school training or a college degree. But that's not the same for every single person. When I talk to employers all around my district, primarily, especially in Racine, they talk about the need to have more qualified employees who have not just the hard skills, but the soft skills. And all of those things we have to do a better job teaching people. So it doesn't matter if it's in Burlington or if it's in Racine or anywhere else. I want to make sure every person who wants to work has a chance to do so.
So are you suggesting more expansion of choice beyond Milwaukee and Racine then?
Yeah, I would like to see that. Now, I would like to have some sort of criteria that is based on the reality of what a school district is doing. The way it's happened in the past, Milwaukee obviously had the greatest need, but it had a champion in Polly Williams, and the fact that she was willing to work with Governor Thompson to make school choice a reality in the city of Milwaukee. I put as one of my own priorities, the very highest priority I had in the last legislative session, was to expand school choice to Racine. But it took a lot of work for me to get that done.
So you envision more cities named in this from this?
Well, my point is that it shouldn't be an individual legislator to champion the cause. My hope is that you would have some sort of criteria that says, in Racine as an example, we have the new report card put together by Superintendent Evers and by Governor Walker, which shows that 3 out of 4 high schools were in need of improvement. If I'm a parent in Racine and 3/4 of the schools aren't doing a good job, I think I should have more choice than to send my child to one of those 3 failing schools.
Would you favor a statewide program?
If there was some sort of criteria similar to that, where let's just say XYZ community had a problem where the report card shows that their schools are failing, parents don't have other options, I certainly think that that'd be an area to expand school choice to. But just having me pick Waukesha or a different city without that objective criteria, that's one way to do it. But I think we'd be much better off for the entire educational system to have some certainty which says, look, we're going to give you every opportunity to improve. But if the public school is showing that it's not doing the job that's necessary for parents, we're going to allow parents to go outside the traditional public system and choose a private school or a voucher school.
And believing that, though, would you favor more regulation on choice schools so we could weed out the bad schools? Because right now, is some horror stories out
There is, but we've done a pretty good job of that over time, because don't forget, Democrats were in control for 2 years of the process, and they passed additional regulations on choice schools. For the most part, almost all of those are still in place. We made very small tweaks to the process. If there's a school that's not educating kids, we got to get them out of the program. If there's a school that's not managing their resources well, we got to get them out of the program. But I also don't want to have a bureaucrat who thinks that every school should look like this box, deciding that this school doesn't look enough like it is, so we're going to kick you out of the program.
And I agree with that too, but I mean, we just had a story in the paper like, you know, a couple of weeks ago focusing on a school where reading levels and math levels at a choice school were like 20%. So, I mean, and you say we have to close these schools, but it's not happening. So how do you close these schools?
Well, first of all, that's why we're going to the new system where every single school is going to participate in the same program beginning in the spring of 2014. So all schools will have the same test. You'll be able to compare a public school in Milwaukee and a private school. That's something that I think we should, because every single school should meet the criteria that a parent knows that they can judge to ensure that their child's going to be successful. But also remembering, though, that it's not necessarily fair to have a third grader in a private school and a third grader in a public school tested unless they've gone through the entire process the same. So if they started in kindergarten, get to third grade in a public school. If they started in kindergarten, get to third grade in a private school. Compare those two together, that's fair. But if you have a child who transfers in after 9 unsuccessful years in a public school, and then you test them as a freshman in high school, well, of course they're going to be doing worse than they would in the traditional setting, because they've had 9 years in the public school. So we've got to make sure that the criteria is fair, so that you don't just have the cherry picking of statistics on either side. So it can really be something parents use.
There certainly are some very good choice schools in Milwaukee. But as James pointed out, there are some that are not. And the longitudinal study that the University of Arkansas did showed very little difference in outcomes between the choice schools and the public schools. So I'm wondering, given that, maybe you don't agree with that finding, but I wonder, given that, why you would have so much support for expanding choice.
Well, first of all, I guess let's take your supposition to be fact, that the schools had about the same criteria for outcomes.
That's what the report
Yeah, I mean, I won't even argue that.
Yeah.
So then let's take and say, well, if the parents get to make the choice, which means at the end of the day they are getting the same results, shouldn't that be something that we support as a way to involve parents? Number two, if we are able to get the same results for a reduced cost for taxpayers, isn't that something we should also look at and say, wow, how are they able to innovate and get the same results for less cost than somebody in a public school? So I will not say that for sure I agree with all of those findings, because I think I can look at different studies that show we have a higher graduation rate from those private schools, that you have higher satisfaction, that you have more long-term success. But if, worst case scenario, I accepted your supposition to say that they get the same results with parents being more involved and less dollars from taxpayers, I guess that's a victory too.
I mean, the counter argument, though, would be, why not pour that money into the public schools with strings attached to try to improve them?
Well, I have not seen, and you know, somebody who's watching this, if you can send it to me to my email account, I'd love to see it. But I have not seen a study that shows simply the amount of money being spent on a school guarantees success. So we have school districts which are spending less money who do better. We have school districts like Milwaukee, which spend one of the highest per pupil rates in the entire state, and they're one of the worst in the entire state. So if it was just about the money, I guess I would buy into that, but I don't think it is.
And what about the idea of expanding choice beyond low-income families? The original idea behind choice was that low-income students should have a choice because they didn't because of their income. How does that square with middle-class families, which now, given the new income guidelines, gets into the at least lower end of the middle class?
You know, I have always been shocked that if our goal is to ensure that a child goes to school, becomes trained in whatever field of study they choose, and they graduate ready to work, why should I care who pays the light bill and the teacher's salary? If it's a private school or a public school, as long as the outcome is what's important, it shouldn't matter whatsoever. So I wish we had more options for every single parent to say, take the school that's going to work best for your child. Have some objective criteria to make sure that they're meeting those demands. But if it's a public school or a charter school, if they decide to homeschool or it's parochial, as long as at the end of the day they are ready to work and not going to be a drain on society, that should be a victory for every single person who cares about the child. But we get caught up into the politics because the teachers union doesn't have people who are on the payroll at a private school, or because maybe there's a for-profit corporation who might make a profit at the end of the day if they're successful and parents choose that. why should we care as long as at the end of the day, the child graduates and is ready to work?
On another subject, any plans to change the way we dole out electoral votes?
Well, that's a quick turnaround.
That's quite a segue.
Yeah, that is we could talk about that quick if you want to. We have not had that discussion in our caucus.
Residency rules. How do you feel about that?
I have never personally believed in residency rules. I think that if you use a criteria based on the job, let's say you're a firefighter and that you are on backup and you have to live within 20 minutes of the fire station because it's part of your job. I totally accept that, and I think that's something that could be negotiated. But just to say that you have to live in the city of Milwaukee or the city of Burlington, the city of Racine, where literally one house is in the city and the house next door might not be, but you can buy this one and you can't buy that one, makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Milwaukee politicians are a little worried about that. Is that something that you're going to pursue?
Well, I actually, before we were supposed to meet last time, after the editorial board before the snowstorm, I was supposed to go meet with Mayor Barrett. We are meeting again tomorrow. So we have not had that discussion yet. But I have consistently been a supporter of not having residency rules and allowing people based on, once again, the time to do their job as opposed to just arbitrarily saying everybody must live inside or outside one municipality or another. I've always been a supporter
Now,
of that.
the mayor's argument, of course, is that it's a hit to the middle class in the city.
And you're stripping the tax base.
Right, and the tax
Well,
base.
I'll tell you, I own property in the city of Milwaukee. I just got my property tax bill. It went up, I think, 11%. So if the goal is to keep middle income taxpayers in the city so the property tax rates can stay low, that didn't work so well this time. But the goal should be to make it a place where you want to go as a resident. I have constituents, people that I know who used to help me financially, who sold their property in Burlington and moved to the city of Milwaukee because that's where they wanted to live. They are retired without kids. So I think that there are people who make all kinds of life choices, but it shouldn't be about trapping people inside a community because it's the only way you get them to want to stay.
So what is the likelihood going to be that there'll be legislation introduced on residency?
It's introduced 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was introduced 2 years before that. So, I mean, since I've been in the legislature, that we've seen a bill. So any bill that it gets introduced, it goes through the process, and we make the decision whether it comes to the floor for a vote or not.
It's,
Will it be
it's
introduced?
clearly a discussion item in our caucus.
And there will be a bill?
Like I said, there has been the last 3 sessions that I've been in the legislature, so I'm pretty sure there will be.
If we could go back to schools for a moment,
Yeah.
in wake of the Newtown shooting, and how would you go about addressing, or what's the plan for addressing gun laws here? Going to, would you want to limit large magazines? Would you want armed guards in every school? What are your thoughts on keeping children safe?
Well, I don't favor the idea of putting armed guards in every school. I think that should be a local decision. If the school board decides that that's a priority for where they choose to spend their taxpayer dollars, I would totally be supportive of that local decision. But when you look nationwide, there are approximately 900,000 police officers and about 140,000 schools. So just the basic math would be incredibly expensive when there are kids who are hurt in all kinds of ways. There are kids who are hurt in crossing to get to school.
Right.
There are kids who obviously are hurt inside the school. And I mean, my heart breaks when I watched what happened. I think the entire nation was riveted because you see a tragedy like that, especially with so many young lives snuffed out in an early moment in their entire, it's sad. I don't know what else to say. But I think that one of the things that we've done is to try to make sure that we get past all the politics. You'll notice that politicians usually, whenever there's a tragedy, are the first ones to go out and have a press conference saying they have the answer. We don't even know all the facts. I'm still waiting for the final report to come out. I have already had the conversation with our new health committee chair, his name's Eric Severson, to say we are going to look at our mental health laws to see if there are things that we could tighten up to ensure that every single person who does not have the legal ability to own a weapon doesn't have one.
Does a normal human being need something that fires 100 rounds in a minute, though?
Well, I mean, it's not really up to me to decide. First of all,
does a citizen need that? I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
well, I mean, I don't need it. I mean, I'll be honest, that's not my hobby. But for others who want to use it as a hobby or to do things like that, I don't see any problem with having those kind of opportunities to utilize something like that as long as it's done safely. The question comes down to, there are millions of high-capacity magazines all around our country right now. So let's just say that we stop selling them tomorrow. Does that mean that the day after tomorrow, there will no longer be shootings where somebody uses a high-capacity magazine? No. So the question is, either you can deal with the actual problem, which are individuals who break the law. Felons have the ability to get guns all the time, and they're already illegal. So what would we accomplish other than feel good? And one of the things that I have promised to our caucus is we are not going to pass feel-good bills that make a good press story but never have a reality. It's why we're not going to pass a mining bill that never brings mining jobs here, because we could all say kumbaya and put out a press release talking about a victory, but if it doesn't accomplish the goal, what's the point? To me, the problem with this situation in Newtown is the fact that you had someone who was mentally deranged. You had an opportunity where his mother had the weapons legally. He stole them. I mean, that's already against the law. So we're not really looking at what's happening.
Well, we've got a lot of laws in the books already that people just ignore. And Robin already pointed out, criminals get guns. So we could outlaw high-capacity rifles. We could outlaw large-capacity magazines. But does that really protect us from tragedies like Newtown or Colorado or whatever if people are willing to break the law? I think Robin's exactly right. We got to treat the symptoms to the problem, and that's our mental health issues.
Do you think if more people carried guns, people would be safer?
I don't know that necessarily goes hand in hand.
A lot of talk by the NRA. If there are more people having guns, they'd be able to protect situations like Colorado.
I think there are situations where, I mean, you could make a case that if somebody was armed and a perpetrator goes in and tries to rob a store, if they are properly trained and they are ready to utilize the weapon, it probably could save lives. You could make the case the opposite way. We don't know. We are not proposing to arm the entire citizenry. We are not proposing to disarm the entire citizenry. I think at the end of the day, you have to have people who are utilizing things legally, and that's what we have for the most part in our country.
So what do you have in mind on taxes? You talk about tax reform. What does that look like?
Sure. Over the course of the summer, we had a legislative council symposium with Democrats and Republicans looking at the income tax code. We learned a lot of things that I, quite frankly, even having been on the Finance Committee, wasn't fully aware of until you take the time to really study a topic. Number one, our tax code. And this is national. We brought in national experts, we brought in state experts, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. They all got to give their input. And one of the things that they all agreed on, and you know how hard it is to get Democrats and Republicans to agree on just about anything? Here's what they agreed on.
Rumors.
Yeah. They said our tax code is one of the most complex in the entire country. It is cumbersome and it's expensive. Well, that's a good place to say, well, we can fix that. Number two, they said that if the goal is to create income tax reform, you should start with looking at all the credits that we give, all the different interest groups that ask for things that we grant. That's something else that we should look at. If you give a tax credit for, water bottle production, and it creates more water bottles, but they would have been produced anyways, that's nothing more than spending for a special interest group. So we should look at every single tax credit that we have and ask the criteria, is it doing what we need? And if the tax credit wasn't there, would it be done anyways? Because there are other ways for us to utilize the tax code to get positive things done. I believe in tax incentives. If you have an incentive to hire people, sometimes that actually creates extra opportunity to do that. But if you're going to hire the people anyways, it's just nothing more than a corporate giveaway. So that's some of the things that we discovered. We also learned that if you look at our tax code on a national basis, there are 43 states that have an income tax, 7 states that do not. One is the best, one is the worst, 43 is the best. If you are in the bottom income strata, that's those below $20,000, we're like number 38 or 39, which means we are one of the best places in the country to be low income. Now, it's nowhere is a good place to be low income, but if you had to do it, Wisconsin is a pretty progressive state in that regard. If you're on the upper end, which means you earn over $200,000 according to our tax code, we're about number 14 or 15. So definitely not the best, which is the lower number, like 43, but we're also not the worst. Mm-hmm. It's that swath in the middle, the 20,000 to 200,000, where we are number 4 or 5. So if you look nationwide on income taxes, we are a bad place to be a middle-class taxpayer. That's something else I didn't realize. So if we could take our tax code and we could simplify it by getting rid of those special interest credits and giveaways, focusing it on the middle class, who are the ones who are out of touch with the rest of the country, I think that we could have a substantial income tax reduction that would not only give more money to the middle class to be able to spend, but it would give more money to business owners, and it would give more money to every single person to reinvest in our state, especially in light of the massive tax increases that happened yesterday, in addition to what happened under Obamacare.
Are you suggesting lowering of rates, the income tax, state income tax rate for those between 20 and 200?
Correct.
Okay. And do you have a number that you're thinking about?
We haven't, because we went through the symposium, and it was a learning process. So we went through and really tried to get a handle on the area that we wanted to focus on. So now we work with Governor Walker. I know he is also interested in an income tax reduction. He also, I don't think, has put anything on paper, at least I haven't seen anything, I don't know if you have. But I know that they are beginning their work on the budget, and we are now working with Fiscal Bureau to say, how could it be done? We looked at a variety of scenarios. We looked at a flat tax, because many of us advocated for that. But in order to achieve roughly the same amount of revenue or even a reduction, you'd have to raise taxes on people on the lower end. We're not going to do that. We're not going to raise taxes on anybody.
What do you expect the hit to be on revenue, or the impact on revenue of what you're proposing?
Yeah, we don't know yet, because we want to have a meaningful
What
one.
would your goal be? Would it be revenue neutral, or do you expect less revenue?
No, I want to have a reduction in income taxes brought in. We know that based on the early numbers that we have, and Governor Walker and
Once you
Republicans.
factor out the,
Right.
the economy,
Yeah,
the
the
effects of the economy. Okay.
I mean, so when you look at that, we're going to have $1.7 billion to be able to use toward any of our priorities. Our number one priority, whether we like it or not, is we have to fund Medicaid. We have to wait and see the full effects of Obamacare. Now, one of the frustrations that I had with the fiscal cliff deal yesterday is that we were supposed to have been given some certainty as to what reductions in spending were going to be as we plan for our own budget, but unfortunately now that's kicked off until February. So as Governor Walker and the legislative Republicans try to put together their budget package, we have to wait and see what's going to happen in February, because that is a huge portion of our budget, Medicaid being the fastest growing item in there. Second thing we want to focus on is making sure we have enough money for education. One of the things that I have also discussed, and it should hopefully happen at the local level, but at the state level, when times are tough, it doesn't matter if you're the Journal Sentinel or Rojo's Popcorn or any business around the country, you make reductions when times are bad. And when times are good, you try to get back to your employees and you try to go back to the way things used to be. So my hope is we'll be able to produce more revenue for school districts, give it to them so that they can continue to reinvest in their schools, hopefully give raises to their employees if they're warranted, but at the same time, making sure that we have enough resources, but it's not an unlimited checkbook.
So more funding for public schools this time?
That's my hope. Yep, as we look at our criteria, that's one of the criteria that we have. Public education has always been a top priority for Republicans and Democrats. Unfortunately, when you look at how Democrats solved their deficit, they took 1/3 federal money, 1/3 taxes, and 1/3 cuts in spending. Well, we left the tax increases on the table because our budget was so out of balance when Governor Walker started. We didn't repeal any of those. We kept the cuts in spending in place, but we didn't have that 1/3, which was the federal money. So we didn't have a choice, which was to go ahead with Act 10 and make those reforms. They're working, which is why we've now put money in the rainy day fund 2 years in a row. We have money in surplus. We also know that we have revenues coming into the state as we grow our economy that we can choose to reinvest back in there. One of the things that I have talked about with Governor Walker is to also make sure every single public employee who works for the state gets a raise. Because as I said, when times are tough, you want to make sure that employees give back. But when times are better and revenues return, you want to keep good quality employees throughout the state.
I would just add, you said we didn't have a choice. We did have one other choice, and that was significant layoffs.
Oh, that's true.
We chose a less painful
That's true.
direction.
So what about right-to-work legislation? There was a lot of speculation about that after Michigan passed the bill and the governor signed it into law. Do you expect that will come up in the session? Do you support it?
Well, I can tell you, I have long supported right to work. I have sent out a letter on their behalf. I had the bill drafted but never introduced it. So I feel like I have quite a bit of credibility when I say what I'm going to say, which is that right to work is not going to get to the floor of the assembly. I believe in it, but I don't think it's the right time for Wisconsin.
Why not?
I think Governor Walker's right. We have gone through a tumultuous few years trying to make sure our own state budget was in balance. And I think that when we look at where we are, one of the best parts of my job is that I get to learn things that I thought I knew, but I really wasn't right about. And if you're open enough to change your mind and to think about things differently, you can do a pretty good job as a legislator. I went and took a tour of a training center put on by the steam fitters, and they explained how their wages were put together. Now, my workforce at my factory is non-union. I negotiated with the county with public employees, and I knew how their structure was set up. But I didn't realize until I went through and sat down with union workers and understood how their wages were put together, that when they say they make $58 an hour, that includes the cost of their pensions. That includes the cost of their time off. It includes worker retraining. All those things are factored into the wage. Well, when you negotiate with the public sector, all that you're focused on, because they take for granted that we have the health insurance, we have the retirement, we had all those things by somebody in the past, all you do is negotiate on the wage. So when you said a 2% raise, it was on their wages. But in the private sector, when you say a 2% wage, that has to cover the cost of their health insurance, it has to cover the cost of their retraining, unemployment, all the rest. So I just think that fundamentally, the public and the private sector workers are not the same, even though they're in a union. We dealt with what had to be dealt with to balance our budget, which was public sector pension and employee benefit costs. I think we need to let that rest for a while, because the public has gone through way too many recalls, way too many people arguing and yelling, and neighbors and friends not talking to each other.
Families.
That we certainly don't need to have that again.
Well, the fact is we're in a better situation than we were before. We solved the budget deficit without raising taxes. We now have a surplus, and we've placed money in the rainy day fund for two consecutive years in a row. First time in Wisconsin history. We're not dealing with that crisis. That's why we did Act 10. It's not that we wanted to. It's not we were clamoring to. We needed to do that to solve those problems. Now we need to not only balance the budget, but move forward on jobs. And that really is our focus.
Well,
It's jobs.
you don't expect this to go to the floor. So what do you expect to get to the floor in terms of job creation?
Sure. Well, number one, we talked about income tax reform, which I really think that the more money we allow to stay in the private sector, the more entrepreneurs and individual investors will choose to reinvest in Wisconsin. Number two, we talked about mining, where we know that that is going to produce long-term jobs, not necessarily all right in the short term, but over the long term. One of the other areas that we have heard a great deal of consternation from entrepreneurs is the regulatory process that they have to go through. Let me tell you one quick story of a constituent who I spoke with on the phone. Back in February, she decided she wanted to open up a franchise to take care of senior citizens who have health care needs, people with dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that. She applied for the 2 different permits that were required at the state DHS, and she waited. Now, she had started her business, but you're able to begin the process with applying for the permits and still operate waiting for the final outcome. She had a fairly large cash reserve, $250,000, waiting for these to come forward, and she began to hire people. She had to hire nurses and all these people waiting for the permits. She waited, and she called, and she said, "Where is my permit? It's in the process." So lo and behold, fast forward, she keeps calling, and they finally said, "We will call you when it's ready." Now, fast forward to October, she still has not gotten the permit. She finally called my office and said, "Geez, Robin, I cannot get an answer out of these people. I just need to know, because I've pretty much used up my entire cash reserves waiting for these permits." We got involved, and we literally got to the end where she got them 2 or 3 weeks later, but she had already made the decision that she was going to close because she didn't have the certainty that she needed to be able to hire these 50 people. Now, there's a prime example where maybe the bureaucrat was overworked. Maybe there was an opportunity where there was some problem, but she got him as soon as I was involved. That should never require a legislator to step in to get somebody the permits to open up a new business. And I think that's why we're going to go through a complete regulatory review top to bottom. Wisconsin, when you pass
Every permit?
No, not permits, but the
Okay.
entire regulatory process.
Okay.
So thinking about this way, when the legislature passes a bill, many times we don't know all the criteria that go into the details of every aspect. So we have something called administrative rules. Those rules are, so we pass a bill, we say to the XYZ agency, "You are to promulgate rules." They come back to us for review, and then they become law. Well, the process is pretty focused on the bureaucracy, because in order we pass the bill, they give rules back to us, we can ask for modifications, and then they become law. If we don't agree with what the bureaucracy is doing, we have to pass a bill, and in effect, because it's the governor's bureaucracy, we usually have to get a 2/3 vote in order to override what the governor wanted to do. So it never happens. So in effect, the legislature, wrongfully in my mind, has ceded much of its authority to regulate over the bureaucracy. Now, many of these rules, there are 1,768 chapters. Each chapter could be anywhere from a half a page to 200 pages long, dealing with every rule and regulation you can think of. None of them haven't been looked at in decades. So we have asked every single one of our committee chairs, we're having training next week or the week after, for each committee chair, to go through and say, we want you to look at the areas underneath your purview. If you are Department of Natural Resources, there are a couple hundred chapters that are going to go to different committees with jurisdiction. They're going to take testimony. They're going to listen to the public. They're going to take an opportunity for people on both sides, you know, environmentalists and business groups to say, here's a way that we have problems with this proposal, help to make it better. I think that is going to have a really long-term positive impact on our economy. We're not going to repeal rules that protect the public, but I think there's an awful lot in there that's just never had a review because a bureaucrat put it forward 20 years ago and no one's ever looked at it again.
It
People
sounds
just-
like a gargantuan task.
It is.
And I just can't imagine, given everything else, that you're gonna be able to do anything other than take a few and maybe just have it be window dressed.
If we're only
Oh, no.
one member, but we're involving our staff, we're involving every committee chair, and they're gonna use their expertise, it's gonna actually help them make sure that their committees are experts in their own arenas. So it's gonna help them do their jobs a little better, but it's also, they're going to utilize all the resources available to them to look and take it. It's the first time it's been done in a very long time, but we're going to be able to do it. Maybe not all at once, and it may take a couple of sessions, but the point is to start the process, and I think we're gonna find opportunities to help taxpayers, be they Democrats or Republicans.
So what's the process if you find a regulation that you suspect isn't necessary or is burdensome?
Well, so the rules process allows the following way to happen. So if you promulgate a rule, it goes to, let's say it's an insurance rule, it goes to the insurance committee. The chairman at the time has the ability to hold a hearing. They have the ability to ask for modifications. It goes back to the bureaucracy. They come back to us for review, and we can either say we agree with it or we basically can introduce a bill to stop it till the end of the session. But for every single rule that has never had a hearing, even if it was promulgated 50 years ago, we have the right to pull that rule out and ask for modifications today. So that's one opportunity that we have that's pretty simple, just to work with the bureaucracy, work with the agency to say times are different. When this rule was written, you used a typewriter, not a computer. So there are simple changes like that. If there are other areas where it's a more recent rule or it's something that we have a problem with, we're going to ask the committees to either do a committee bill where Democrats and Republicans can work together to do a repealer bill or to make the changes that are necessary, or an individual legislator could step forward and say, I want to become the champion of this change, and that'll get to the floor as an individual
Is
bill.
it possible that these rules will become politicized or that special interests would have more of an impact if it's done this way than?
Probably not, only from the standpoint that our process is very transparent. When the rules process happens, it's usually done inside a bureaucracy. They have some hearings, but the decisions aren't necessarily made in public like ours are, where you take a vote, you bring a bill forward, people can read it before it becomes law. So hopefully but I want those interest groups to come forward. If the Association of School Superintendents say, here are silly rules the DPI has put forward, I want to know what those are, and I want to be able to make changes so we can improve education.
It's not just special interests, we're actively engaging the public too, whether it's a small business owner or, a homemaker who, and if people want to take a look at them themselves and come to each committee chair and come to ourselves and come with those ideas, we're actively going to engage them. That is, it's going to be an open, transparent process, but it's going to actively engage the public as well, which hasn't been done in a very, very long time in that respect. So I think that's going to be important.
But you're right, this is a huge task.
Yeah, it does.
So we are trying to look at priorities. We are going to ask each committee. Now, some committees only have maybe 5 chapters to deal with. They'll be able to get it probably done in one session. But other committees might be much more expansive, and it might take several. So we'll try to prioritize from that standpoint. So we're going to work through the process in the very best way that we can. But knowing that we believe creating jobs is our #1 priority, it always has been. I think that's another thing Democrats and Republicans agree on. Making regulations that protect the public but don't waste public money or public time should be something we can all embrace, and hopefully we'll be able to.
Changing gears a bit, I write a lot about prison and alternatives to prison. How do you feel about, I know this get tough on crime stances out there, but how would you feel about, coming up with different ways to address the prison population, especially when you consider that the DOC budget is one of the highest budgets we've seen?
Well, okay, let me tell you a personal story, talking about how you can change your mind if you leave yourself open enough to consider new alternatives. I on the Finance Committee tried as hard as I possibly could to kill the Transitional Jobs Program, because I really felt like it was a boondoggle.
Right.
Taxpayer giveaway for people who didn't deserve a second chance. But because I try to be open-minded, I actually hired some people at my business that I own in Milwaukee. And I did it kind of begrudgingly, but I said, you know, if I'm going to be a critic, I should at least see why this program doesn't work. Now, I will say that the first person that I hired on that program stole from me, and they quit. So it kind of reinforced what I said where, geez, this is a wasteful program. But because I wanted to give it another chance, we hired another fellow who had some runs with the law, probably made bad choices in his life, but trying to be a Christian, we hired him and we left him to see if our second person would be able to work out. And you know what? He's an awesome employee. He still worked for me after the program ended. I kept him on. We gave him a raise. He now works 40 hours a week supporting his family. You know, I mean, he's exactly the kind of employee that you would want. So if there are programs like that, like the Transitional Jobs Program, where we take people who really deserve a second chance, I am open to doing that.
Well, it's people want to expand that program statewide, so is that something that you'll be in?
I am open to it, and we got to figure out how we pay for it. So, you know, I want to have the biggest impact. Now, let's be honest, if the largest percentage of the population is in southeastern Wisconsin, we maybe want to have a program that's efficient as possible to get the maximum impact for the limited dollars that we have. But I want to do something. I mean, when somebody gets out of prison, they've got to be productive. I definitely want to make sure. Now, I did another program, kind of a funny story. I did another program where we hired prisoners from Southern Oaks, Southern Oaks Girls School, where I had about 20 prisoners who came and worked for me every day. They have a program where they hire people out as temporary employees, paid them $10 an hour, you know, regular wage, and they were great workers too. So if people are given a chance, I know. Now, the funny thing is, after I worked with them for a little while, they realized that I was one of the people who voted away to take their good time. So they weren't exactly happy about that, but they were definitely great employees. So if we can do those kind of programs, I'm all in favor.
But we can't continue to go with the status quo because we can't afford it, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. But at the same time, there are very few things I would ever vote to raise taxes to do. I mean, I've never voted for tax increase. I've taken the pledge. But I think keeping the public safe is a worthwhile investment. If I had to ask the public to pay a slightly higher tax bill to keep people who deserve to be in jail, I would. But the question is, we need to make sure that everybody who's in jail deserves to be there.
I think there's maybe some different areas too. Drug offenses, even though I'm from a small community, the drug environment is through the roof. And looking at the reoffenses of people that commit drug crimes, we're not talking about dealers per se. We're just talking about people who have addictions and use drugs in most cases, not the dealers. But the reoffense rate of people that have gone into the correction system is through the roof. And for me, I have some personal family experience, unfortunately, dealing with people in this environment.
We all do.
I'm sorry?
We all do.
Yeah. So I have firsthand experience of it, and I know that we pay nearly $40,000 a year to house somebody in a correctional facility.
Yeah.
But when they get out, especially on a drug offense, and these are a lot of times very young people who have just made bad choices, that the support for them through our parole and probation, they might have basically one appointment a month with their parole and probation officer where they're going to be tested at that time. So what these people are doing who have addictions, what they often do is they make a decision. You know, if my appointment's later in the month, maybe I can get high today and not get caught. So what ends up happening in most cases, they do get caught eventually. They get back into that culture and back into that circle. So I guess my thought, if there's a way for us to maybe not necessarily spend more, but maybe divert some of our resources to keep them from going back.
Well, talk about your bill you have.
Over and over. Well, and that's where I'm getting to. There was actually a bill, we did some research on this, that was passed in Hawaii. It's called Swift and Certain, that is part of the parole and probation system, where once they are released, they are given a color assigned to them, and most people have a cell phone nowadays. And what it does is they are given a color, and they're sent a text out every single day with a different color, and it's all computer randomly done. And if your color is yellow, and it shows up on your text, you have 24 hours to show up and have a drug test, or you're reoffending. Their recidivism rate's gone down 80% in Hawaii. Now, I think that's a potential. I still believe there needs to be a penalty portion. We can't say that drug offenses are okay and we're going to be soft on it, because you are making a bad choice that affects society. So there needs to be a punishment portion of it, but we're going to help you when you get out so that you don't reoffend. I mean, we could still be very harsh on it, but if they're just going to reoffend, it's going to be more of a cost to society as well, not just themselves. So I just think from an investment standpoint, that's an opportunity for us to look for creative ways to reduce the recidivism.
But it's both inside the cells and inside the prisons and outside as well. There are ways we can reorganize existing programs within the prisons. Alcohol and drug dependency is clearly a major factor with regard to individuals committing more crimes once they get out. I think there are ways, and I worked on this when I was on finance with Mark Pocan, who I still call a crazy wide-eyed liberal, but we actually sat down and were able to figure out what may work, and we came up with some interesting concepts, which unfortunately in the previous administration fell by the wayside, but I think there are ways we can come together, both with regard to community treatment and with regard to the treatment and skills training, giving basic job skills to those prisoners who are in prison, because I think they need more of that, and I think most Republicans and Democrats would agree there should be more of that type of skills training within prison walls. But at the same time, I mean, Senator Taylor, today, she was at a press conference and she said we need to sit down and talk about corrections. I think she has some good ideas, and while we may not agree on everything, those discussions are going to occur, and I think there are ways we can come together as Republicans and Democrats and find ways to reduce the cost without reducing the sentences or reducing in the public mind the punishment.
Well, I was surprised. I'll be honest, I don't know anybody who's gone to prison, personally. I just don't have that background. So I took the time and I went out and spent time with these prisoners when they were working. And, of course, you say, what are you in for? And the vast majority of them were in for drug offenses. And I asked simple questions, and they were all younger people. They were probably 30 and younger. And I said, what could I do to get you to not offend? And they said, well, first of all, the job skills that they have coming out of prison are rudimentary at best. One of the women said, it makes no sense for you to teach me how to type if I'm not going to go and become a secretary. Because learning how to type isn't a skill that I need to go and get a job in the field that I'd like to go into. But they just had to fill a slot, so they put her into this pool to learn how to type. I mean, we can do better than that. One of the other ones said, the biggest problem was, and this is what they all said, my parents never told me no. They said if I would have had stricter criteria and when I committed minor offenses at home, my parents enforced some sort of rules, I probably would have never gotten to the point where I committed crimes to go to prison. So it's a lot bigger than just expecting the state of Wisconsin and the taxpayers to fix a problem that is a whole lot deeper than just saying, we've got an easy answer.
Well, and I asked that very same question of some of the people that I know, young people that made bad choices, why? Young girls, pretty young girls, young boys that very athletic, have potential, had potential to be successful in sports. And their response to me was they didn't see a lot of hope for their future. Now, living in a small town, you may not see a lot of opportunity there, but right now my community's got a lot of potential for new jobs in the shipbuilding and other areas that support that. So maybe if you have a college degree right now, you don't see that as a place for you to end up. But then I'd sit back and I look at what are we doing, going back to education. You go to and my wife's a public school teacher, so this isn't just a bash on public schools, but we have focused over the last 25 years about college. Every child should go to college. And I would say every child should have the right and the opportunity to go to college. But not every child, when they're ready to graduate from high school, is mature enough to go to college or wants to go to college and wants to make that decision. So my question comes back to what are we doing to prepare the kids in my hometown and statewide for jobs that exist in our community? Good paying jobs. You can make $60,000 a year working at Marinette Marine in a community where you can still buy a house for a nice house for $80,000.
If we could talk briefly, I know we're getting short on time, but briefly about a couple of other issues that I know are going to come up. One is the venture capital bill. What do you expect to see in a new venture capital bill? And do you think that the CAPCO element would be part of one?
I have accepted the fact that even though I think capcos could potentially have a role in a solution that we could all buy into, the Senate is not interested in that, so we have taken that off the table. I don't believe that capcos are something that's going to be in a venture capital bill. I just read Senator Olson's comments where he expressed concerns that I think kind of echo what a lot of people have said about venture capital. I accept the fact that there are small companies all around the state who just need access to financing to take their product to market. Totally understand that. It's tough right now, small banks, you talk to a banker, it is difficult with all the new federal regulations to be able to get loans approved with new capital requirements and all kinds of red tape that is doing nothing but creating jobs for bureaucrats. So we've got to figure out a way to get money in the hands of entrepreneurs. But I do have some sincere concerns in the fact that I don't want to create a system where you have well-intentioned bureaucrats, well-intentioned elected officials picking and choosing winners and losers in the marketplace. Under Democrats, lots of money would have went to companies that were focused on green energy. Maybe some of them would have paid off, maybe they wouldn't have. But my fear is, would they have gone to those because of political support or ideological support or on a wing and a prayer? Republicans probably would have our own set of people that we'd like to give money to if it was just based on our politics. I don't know if either one's right for taxpayers. So if we were able to create something where it was independently managed, there was no hint of political interference, and it was done in a way that maximized taxpayer return while minimizing the chances of loss, I am open to that. My understanding is that all of the venture capital groups have been working together to come up with a consensus bill. Last time around, there were many people pushing for different versions, and I think that's why it ultimately died. So one of the things we've asked is get together, sit around a table, come up with something that you think will work with the criteria that we have outlined, and come back to us.
You have a
That would
preference
be
for how it
another
would?
time, hint off, but you said it's been taken off the table, so you're not, it's just not gonna be considered.
No, Capco's
Capco
been taken off. Those are not part of the
That's
discussion.
one of the funding sources.
Yeah, as one of the options.
The VC bill, I think,
Right.
is still
Okay.
definitely in
Yeah.
play.
VC bill is okay, capital.
Just not
I
Capco, yeah,
misunderstood.
My question was on VC, do you have a preference as to how it would be funded?
I don't.
There's been all kinds of sort of ideas suggested.
Right. From our caucus's perspective, I think we are very leery to take on additional debt without some sort of possibility to pay it back. Once again, Republicans and Democrats have been guilty in many ways where we have not really paid much on principle. We just keep rolling it forward and adding. That's what they've done in Washington, not very effective in a long-term strategy. So if we saw a way where we would borrow the money, but somehow it was dedicated where it had to go toward paying off like almost like a revenue bond, I would be more open to borrowing money. But if it's just general obligation bonds, where a future legislature can say, as the money is paid back, we're going to use it to build a new prison or put money into schools or do whatever else, well, then all we're doing is adding debt without enough upside. So some of those protections would have to be in there.
And then I wanted to ask you about drunken driving legislation. Representative Ott and Senator Darling have a bill that they're about to advance that would tighten up drunken driving laws in the state. Would you support stricter drunken driving laws in
Well,
Wisconsin?
I subscribe to the Journal Sentinel, so I've seen that you've been doing
You saw
some.
that?
I've seen that there's been some op-ed, or there's been some editorial, and there's been some articles.
Right.
So I called my office today, just saying, do we have a fiscal estimate to know what the cost would be to take third-time or more felonies and create those as a felony? Well, it would require, according to the estimates, the construction of 16 new prisons, about $1 billion of new costs, and about $100 million a year to operate. Now, I'm happy if you want, David, I can have her send you that fiscal bureau memo so you can take a look at it.
Sure,
but
sure.
that's one of the concerns that I have, that it's not just as simple as saying lock everybody up, because there's a backside. What do we do when people are put into prison? We got to have enough places to house them. We got to make sure we can take care of them. And at the end, they're going to get out. So what's going to happen? All of us want to be tough on drunk driving, but it's the key is not to just be punitive, but to actually go after the people who are the biggest perpetrators.
16 new prisons?
That's what they say, yeah.
16?
1-6.
1-6?
I got it on my phone.
For
I can.
3 and over? Because that just seems...
Let me read it to you, because I don't want to be politifacted.
Okay, well, I
Too late.
mean, we
I know exactly, isn't it?
You're done, forget it.
That's
I
it.
think we have 16 prisons in the state right now.
The fiscal estimate for increasing the penalties for third offense or greater is about $500 million. $500 million. That includes the construction costs of 16 new correctional facilities. This estimate doesn't break it down to only third or fourth offense. The annual cost would be hundreds of millions of dollars.
But you said earlier that you would be if you want to raise taxes on anything, it's to protect the public, to keep them safe. would stiffer laws keep the public safer?
Potentially, but the question is, I actually think that our drunken driving laws are fairly severe. I think that we are pretty harsh on somebody who commits a first offense. It's not cheap. You have to go to a mandatory assessment. I mean, we go through that entire process. So the question comes down to many of the people, when you see these heinous crimes, I had one in my own district in Caledonia, where it was a repeat person who shouldn't have been driving anyways. So the question comes down to what can be the most effective. I don't know if building 16 new prisons at a cost of $500 million is the most effective, when we could look at using that maybe on treatment, or trying to say what can we do to make sure people don't get on the road to begin with.
Thanks for joining us.
I always appreciate it. We would love the opportunity. I mean, we've had this discussion. We're going to try to do as much outreach as we can. So maybe every 6 months or every few months, if you'd be open to that, we'd love to come back.
We'd love to have you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.